Each of these players, of course, did win their first game, so first round. So Elias Watsfeld and Dennis Dalgaard looking to keep that streak alive. You call it a streak when it's won? I'm going to call it a streak.
You say, of course, they might have had a bye.
Possible. Eldrazi Temple coming down on turn 1 for Dennis Dalgaard. His card's on the table in terms of what he's looking to play. Draws Eldrazi Displacer, which he potentially could cast as early as the second turn thanks to that Temple. But Yavimaya Coast, even though it's foil, not going to help him casting that 3-drop on turn 2. So he's going to have to just pass things back to Watsfeld, who with Razorverge Thicket and Gavany Township also doesn't have an early play.
No, it seems like both of these players have quite some slow draws. Oh, Dennis still doesn't have the white mana. He plays a basic forest, has to ship back the turn, and Elias draws a Noble Hierarch. That's basically 2 turns too late, because he cannot afford to spend his turn now just playing 1 Noble Hierarch, leaving up 2 mana. I'm betting that he's gonna go for one of his 3 drops. Could go for Sin Collector, or he could go for Thalia the Heretic, it seems.
Dalgaard did have the option of playing an Eternal Witness, but a 2-1 for 3 with no other abilities, not good enough in Modern. And here comes Thalia Heretic Cathar for Watsfeld. That will mean that non-basic lands and creatures come into play tapped for Dennis Dalgaard. Also, he has to deal with a 3-2 first striker. Cavernous Souls coming into play. I would guess naming Eldrazi here. Once you've got an Eldrazi Temple around, the jig is kind of up in terms of what you're looking to be doing. Yeah, will mean that he's got the white mana to cast Eldrazi Displacer in future turns.
But it does come into play tapped because of the Thalia. Thalia does not only say creatures come into play tap, but non-basic lands also come into play tap, which is actually quite good in this format.
So here we have, there he is, Mayor of Averbrook, seeing a resurgence here at Grand Prix Copenhagen, making all humans have +1/+1, and it's got the werewolf ability. If it transforms, that Mayor of Averbrook will start creating wolf tokens. So with Exalted on top, that's 5 damage coming through there from Thalia. Another Eternal Witness for Dennis Dalgaard. His draws not matching up well against what Elias Watsfeld is suddenly presenting here. Engineered Explosives, a temptation here, but goes initially for Eldrazi Displacer. Not going to have the mana to flicker any creatures just yet.
It comes into play tap as well. Now has 2 mana left. He could go for Engineered Explosives, but decides not to.
It would only be able to get the Noble Hierarch. I guess that he's got bigger things that he wants to worry about. Also, I guess having it as a safety valve to deal with lots of wolves is something that he may be considering if he's able to weather the storm of this next turn or 2. Watsfeld with Reflector Mage. Reflector Mage pairing up very nicely with that Thalia. Bounces the Eldrazi Displacer. Can't get played next turn. The following turn, if it comes into play tapped. And that means that there's just all kinds of time that the Reflector Mage buying, and Thalia getting a hit in here again for 5. Dennis Dalgaard down to 9 life here. Sorry, that was for 6 because of the second Noble Hierarch.
Yeah, and I think next turn might actually be lethal already.
Bant Eldrazi. It was on a mulligan to begin with, and the draws haven't stacked up too nicely. Thought Not Seer coming into play tapped, sees 2 Path to Exile and a Collected Company and a Sin Collector here. An Embarrassment of Riches in hand for Elias Watsfeld. Has enough mana to cast the Collected Company, meaning that it's a good one for Dalgaard to take while he can. But he's going to have to square up to the fact that he's facing a lot of damage this coming turn.
And despite only starting out on turn 3, he actually had quite some powerful turn 4 and 5. And I think turn 6 will see a kill, no? If he just attacks with everything. Yep, and then activates.
Attacks with 3, pumps with the Gavany Township. That's enough to close out game 1. Stony face Dennis Dalgaard shuffles up. He's going to be going to his sideboard, trying to find a way of getting things back going for game 2. We will have that game 2 for you soon enough, but first, these messages. Hello and welcome back to Grand Prix Copenhagen. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Moraine Leibert, and we've already seen our first game between Elias Watsfeld and Dennis Dalgaard. That one went to Watsfeld in a tour de force from the humans deck. Bant Eldrazi not really able to get too much going in the first game, and we're going to get a chance to have a look in on another match while those guys are finishing up their sideboarding. Fabian Thiele on the left of our screen, he's on Merfolk and has plenty of Merfolk in play against 2 Anderson, who looks to be on living end here, just cycled an Archfiend of Ifnir, and that one an interesting one in terms of the shape of this match. If it works out that 2 Anderson can get out of the hole he finds himself immediately, which is to say lots of fish all coming in, he needs to find himself a living end very, very quickly indeed here.
Yeah, a living end and a 4th land, because he needs to pay 1 mana extra for the Curse Catcher, but he does find the 4th land. Now, does he also have the Cycling?
He has a Violent Outburst in hand here. He can even cycle Street Wraith beforehand in order to get an extra creature in the graveyard. With 2 Mutavaults in play, he is still potentially facing a few attackers and or blockers, but I think that he has to pull the trigger now because there's, or I guess, given that Violent Outburst is an instant, he might want to at least let Thiele try and get a bit more going on. May even potentially be able to snag a Mutavault while it's attacking.
Yeah, it might be, but he's got to be careful, Anderson, because of the Ether Vial, because Ether Vial could drop into play a 2nd Curse Catcher, and a 2nd Curse Catcher would mean that he needs 5 mana if he wants his living end to resolve. So if he waits for his opponent's turn, he gives Thiele Fabian 1 more card, which he will draw, of course. So I don't think that's what he wants to do. I think the Mutavaults wouldn't be too big of a problem, because he also got Fulminator Mage. He will have quite some big guys as well. He's also got the Archfiend to actually shrink all of the creatures if needed.
So we see here 2 Anderson digging through his deck. Only 1 card that he's going to be able to hit off this Cascade, that being Living End. A little bit of extra information for Thiele there, but he knows what's going on here. This is still game 1, so it's taken a little bit of time for 2 Anderson to actually hit the point of casting his living end. Sometimes these decks do want to kind of sandbag the living end till the last possible moment, because they do get more value that way.
Yeah, no 2nd Curse Catcher. He does get back the Curse Catcher, which is a nice little bonus for Fabian, but I don't think he will be able to beat that board. Especially Archfiend is going to be very, very potent.
Yeah, the Archfiend meaning that now if 2 Anderson wants to cycle more threats, every time he does so, every creature that Fabian Thiele does have in play is going to be getting -1/-1 counter.
Yeah, it works very well with Street Raid, for example. You just pay 2 life, everything of your opponent gets -1/-1.
So 2 Anderson doing that on his turn. Thiele going to be untapping and seeing if he can deal with the newfound gigantic board of Anderson. Desert Ceradon, a new pickup for the Living End deck alongside Archfiend of Ifnir. 6/4, only cycles for red, doesn't have the sort of double color cycling or the hybrid color cycling of the likes of Monstrous Carabid. But you know what, it's just bigger, and the fact that it doesn't have to attack means that some people have made the switch.
Yep, I think this deck has gotten quite better. I mean, if your key cards, all of your cyclers get better, the Archfiend is just very good. It's a better 5-drop, like your other 5-drops that cycled were pretty bad. Like, I don't mind playing this one on turn 5, just as a 5/4 flying. But even if you cycle, it just the deck has gotten a lot better, I think.
So Thiele looking to rebuild here. He's on 20 life, but that life total can go down pretty quickly in the face of this big old board coming from Living End. We've heard that the other matchup is starting on the other table. We're going to stick with this one for maybe a turn or so, just to see what Merfolk can put together. We'll be back with humans against the Eldrazi soon enough.
Shouldn't take too long once 2 gets to untap and start cycling with the Archfiend in play.
Yeah, previously these Merfolk decks could potentially, after a big Living End, if they had the likes of Spreading Seas and so on in play, maybe start thinking about just getting down a Master of Waves, suddenly having a big old board to be able to block with, and then mounting a counter-attack that way. When you have the Archfiend in play, though, it makes it so much more difficult for that kind of a plan to really pay off.
And this is 6/12. This is actually 20 damage, so Fabian needs to put in a blocker that's gonna be big enough to survive the cycling. The -1/-1 counters. There we have it. Another of the new cards cycles for 1 black. And big advantage also is that you no longer have to run Jungle Weaver, which was 2 mana to cycle. Like that's a big difference when you can start cycling on turn 1 always, and then on turn 2 you can pretty much always cycle 2 cards.
Yeah, and Horror of the Broken Lands as well, when it's in play, is getting bigger whenever you're cycling. A lot of pickups that don't change the fundamental nature of what Living End is as a deck, but make it just that much more potent.
Even more consistent than it already was. But it is consistent, but it's also fragile. Like, it's quite easy to beat. If you know what you're doing, you can just beat it quite easily.
Harbinger Tides there coming in off an Aether Vial, and that's an interesting one. It gets to bounce a tapped creature, and exactly the location that you want for your opponent's Archfiend. You don't really want it in their graveyard, because it's easy to get back. You don't necessarily want it in play. Obviously, it has got cycling, so 2 can get it back into the graveyard, but it's going to come at a bit of a cost here, and it means that there's just the 12 coming across.
Yeah, well played by Tuin by not attacking with the Street Trade, because otherwise he might have found himself dead, actually. Mutavault plus the Harbinger would have been lethal. And Vendilion Click does mean he's got 5 damage Fabian, but not have 6.
I like this a lot. This is a really interesting line here from Fabian Thiel, able to find a way of potentially holding off the army that comes from a Living End. And Vendilion Click, 2 Anderson had the option of doing some cycling there in response, maybe getting Archfiend in the graveyard or similar. Now he's going to have to say one of either Desert Ceradon, Street Wraith, there's a land there, Archfiend of Ifnir, or Monstrous Carabid. Something's going to the bottom and getting replaced, if Thiel feels like any of them are a threat.
Yeah. And Harbinger of the Tide's not only good with Aether Vial in this deck, it's also quite good with Merovingery, because you play it, it's a Merfolk, so you tap a creature and then you bounce it because of the Harbinger. So actually quite a combo. The way you can stack it so that it first taps and then bounces.
So a little bit of thought here as to what to do. I mean, he may simply say, you know what, hold on to what you've got. I don't want you drawing into a Cascade essay. A large amount of what the Living End deck does is sort of pretty homogeneous. If you cycle a card from their hand to the bottom of the deck, there's nothing to say they're not going to draw something pretty similar anyway.
Yeah, he might have thought, well, you cannot beat me with this hand. Why would I give you a free cycle? Like, because that's basically what you do when you use the Vendilion Click. You basically give him a free cycle.
Okay, so Silvergull Adept getting to draw an additional card for Fabian Thiel here. If he's able to find a Lord that grants Island Walk, then there is an island in play for 2 Anderson because of that Spreading Seas cast last turn.
Yeah, but with Island and Mutavault and Aether Vial on 4, that might actually be a little bit hard.
Yeah, the 3-cost Lords, they exist. The 2-cost Lords, yep. 4-cost, a little bit messier.
But I think Tua is in trouble. He cannot use his Wooded Foothills. His Blackleaf Cliffs only gives blue mana. He doesn't have double black, that means. So I think he's actually in trouble. He could have, in response to the Harbinger, cycled 2 cards to kill the Harbinger, but he chose not to. I'm not sure why that was. I think it would have been a better choice to get rid of the Harbinger. He could have cycled the Ceradon and maybe even the Street Trade. Okay, Street Trade does cost you 2 life, but so does the attack of the Harbinger.
So Fabian just carefully reading Living End, making sure that he understands the ramifications of a second Living End. The second one typically not quite as good as the first because there are creatures in the graveyard and they would come back for Fabian Thiel, although admittedly it doesn't look like he has too many in there just yet.
Yeah, and interesting, Fabian has Master of Waves, which actually pumps the Mutavault. So if Tua doesn't block the Mutavault, he actually dies. He could, like, maybe I'll just block the Harbinger, but he should be blocking the Mutavault here.
Yeah, the Mutavault, all creature types, that includes Elemental. And Harbinger of Tides, who is coming down here, generating a lot of Elemental tokens.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 elemental tokens. Tua really needs to put back that Archfiend in play. Or he could just, of course, draw another Living End, which would be quite good as well.
So just using sleeves here in place of elementals. A lot of currently 2-1 elementals. They're naturally 1-0, but the Master of Waves does pump them.
Yeah, so Mutavault is a 3-3, but that's not big enough to kill Street Rate. But it does mean too it goes down to 1 life.
Tense times for the Living End player here, and so many blockers now available.
Yeah, and with Island and Forest, he can only cycle the Archfiend. He cannot cycle the Carabit.
It's not even in a position where he can cast Archfiend of Ifnir here. And not too many basic swamps in his list, I wouldn't imagine. Already one in play. It's exactly what he needs if he wants to win this turn.
Oh, he draws Demonic Dread. That might actually be what he was looking for. Does he have another land to cycle one more card? I'm kind of surprised that Fabian played the Master of Waves last turn, because he didn't really need it. It didn't accomplish anything at that point, and now it means he cannot do it after the Living End resolved. And that might actually be the difference between winning or losing this game.
Well, 2 has a bit of a quandary here, because if he casts Demonic Dread getting to Living End, there is a Master of the Pearl Trident in the graveyard, and because that's giving his Merfolk Island Walk, and there's an island in play, casting Living End itself is not going to stave off the sizable clock needed to deal with that final point of life that he's working with here.
Yeah, and unfortunately his Fulminator Mage can no longer destroy the Blackleaf Cliffs of his own, because it's an island. Because otherwise that would have been an out, but since it's become an island, I don't think you can destroy it anymore.
I think it's still a non-basic land, isn't it?
Is it? No, then that trick actually works.
It is a non-basic island we've had confirmed. So it's a convoluted string of plays here that 2 Anderson's going to need to string together if he wants to just survive. We're not even looking at winning this game just yet.
I'm wondering why Tua is not cycling before he's doing all of this. Like, why didn't he end of turn cycle his Archfiend?
The Archfiend of Ifnir being in the graveyard would definitely be helpful for him at this point.
If you're playing Living End, you gotta cycle these creatures, man. That's the whole goal of your deck. There we go. Have another spin.
Did not take long to find the second one. Can't target. Oh, sorry, yeah. Not targeting the Master of Waves with Demonic Dread. So he's just thinking about whether or not there's any cycling he can do with that Living End on the stack.
Yeah, it seems like he does.
There goes Archfiend of Ifnir. Everything that was alive is now dead, and vice versa. A net positive play for 2 Anderson here, but it's one where he still needs to worry a little bit about what's going on from the other side of things. Because another copy of
Spreading Seas
would be a big problem for him right here.
Yeah.
Though, look at all of the Mutavaults that have been dealt with. Not too many lands left for Fabian Thiel here.
Oh, and he's actually destroying his non-basic island.
Figured it out. Cracked the code, as it were.
So all he needs to do now is dodge another land from Fabian. Then he can start cycling with the Archfiend in play. And he could actually still win this game. Quite an interesting game. We thought it was over when the first living end resolved. Then there was the Harbinger. And now it's actually all up to whether or not Fabian draws another land. He does.
Oh, plays that Spreading Seas as fast as he possibly can. That enough to pick up game one. And we're going to get a chance to jump back and see our first match, that being between Elias Watsfeld and Dennis Dalgaard, where they are, in fact, going to game 3 here.
Interesting that he almost lost because he played the Spreading Seas on a non-basic land.
Yeah. Key learnings here for future games for any of you looking to work with Merfolk. And indeed, I guess for the living end guys, remembering that that's an option. So, mana available for Elias Watsfeld. Looks like he's already...
I think he's already played a Talia, and he's gotten destroyed by a Path to Exile. And he was on the play, because this is game 3. He lost game 2 already. So he on the play, he went turn 1 Noble Hierarch, turn 2 Talia, which is actually quite powerful. But Dennis must have played his Hallowed Fountain untapped. Participating, he had to use the Path to Exile end of turn.
Smart play here, and Gideon, ally of Zendikar, not one that we necessarily see a lot of in Modern, but makes sense in this deck, immediately getting a Knight ally into play. As much as this is a Bant Humans deck, that Knight ally of indeterminate race. Additional mana there being provided by the Eldrazi Scion, meaning that Reality Smasher can come down here. Now, where is Dennis Dalgaard going to direct these attacks? Looks like he just wants to get Gideon gone while he can.
Yeah, even if Elias puts the Knight in front of the Reality Smasher, which is a 5/5 haste, it also has trample, so that would have meant 3 trample damage and 2 flying damage, so no use to block there.
Champion of the Parish, followed up by Reflector Mage. Reflector Mage, one of the things that can target the Reality Smasher in a relatively efficient way.
Yeah, and Reflector Mage actually doing some good work in these first few rounds. It's been really good last round in round 1 when it was also played in the human deck.
Banned in standard. It's pretty good.
For some reason.
So not too much coming from Dalgaard that turn. Wasn't able to replay the Reality Smasher even if he wanted to. And Watsfeld looks like he picked up, and is it Staticaster that turn? The Staticaster, it does have flash, but it requires red mana to cast, not something currently available to Watsfeld. Goes for Meddling Mage. We'll find out what Meddling Mage names soon enough. I can't help but think that given that Reflector Mage just bounced a Reality Smasher, that's a relatively safe card to name here.
Yep. Quite a good combo as well. Both of them are humans. So is the Staticaster. So he's actually went very deep and looked for all of the humans. And it seems like he found quite a bit of them. And I think the glue that gets this deck together is the Cavern of Souls, which is like basically a free City of Brass. And he's also running City of Brass, of course, just to make sure that he can play all of these different colored humans.
Well, when your Eldrazi Sky Spawner is trading off with a Knight Ally token, that's bleak times here for Dennis Dalgaard, taking a bit of a hit there.
Yeah, and Dennis had quite a good draw here. I mean, turn 1, Path to Exile your Talia, turn 2, Eldrazi Sky Spawner, turn 3, Reality Smasher, kill your Gideon, but he's still on the back foot here, despite having quite a good draw. Yeah,
and still 3 cards in hand here for Elias Watsfeld. He's getting virtual card advantage with that Meddling Mage, stopping Reality Smasher. There is another Eldrazi Temple here from Dennis Dalgaard, and I believe that he's got Drowner of Secrets in hand, so he's going to be able to make his board quite a bit larger all in one go. And being able to sacrifice Eldrazi Scion tokens to tap creatures would have been good for him, but for the fact that Path to Exile immediately dealing with the big Devoid monster.
Yeah, we know he's got the Staticaster, but he's got no red mana to get rid of the Scion, so let's see if he can find a Cavern of Souls or a different form of red mana.
I mean, even if he doesn't, because there's not the big Drowner in play, these Scions right now are 1/1s that may come with some mana upside if Dennis Dalgard wants to go really big. Not too big a way for Watsfeld, I wouldn't imagine.
Ooh, we found a Collected Company.
Danger Zone. What do we have? There's an Izzet Staticaster there. More Meddling Mages if he wants. He could gradually lock Dalgard out to being able to play basically all of the best spells.
This is
in his
game.
deck.
This is game. Shoot your 2 blocker. Oh, actually, he can only shoot 1 blocker because Dennis can sacrifice in response. But he's also gonna put +1/+1 on all of his creatures. And the Champion of the Parish will also get +2/+2 from the 2 humans, so that's quite some damage here. Here we go. 6/6 Champion. And even the Lieutenant gets +1/+1 from the Staticaster.
Yeah, they both come into play at the same time. It's kind of a weird dependency thing here. We'll just make sure that we got it all accurate. Dalgard says, you know what? While I could sacrifice this to only have one of them die, I'm basically done for. Anyway, there's the handshake. Elias Watsfeld of Sweden picks up that win. He's now 2-0 here at Grand Prix Copenhagen. And you know what? I think that there might be a little bit more magic that we can see in our other game, because the sideboarding just finished. Merfolk versus Living End. This their game 2. And Curse Catcher to the play there for Fabian Thiel.
Yeah, and Curse Catcher probably the best card for Fabian in this matchup, because it slows down 2 so hard, and it also gives him back a creature once the Living End resolves. So I think he doesn't mind. I believe he had a second copy. I'm pretty sure he didn't mind the second copy. He's got to be careful of cards like Simeon's Spirit Guide, because some of these Living End versions actually run that card just to get quicker, like a turn 2 or Living End, or turn 3 with 1 mana up to pay for Curse Catcher. So he's got to be careful of that, but apart from that, Curse Catcher I think is one of the best cards in this matchup.
Goes with the Silvergill Adept there, revealing Harbinger of Tides, so that one maybe won't come as quite as much of a surprise as it did in game 1 for 2 Anderson. Draws a card, able to kind of curve out nice and neatly here. Spreading Seas, we saw it, of course, enable the Lords of Fabian Thieler's deck, making sure that Island Walk became relevant. But Living End is a 3-color deck. If it wants to cast its Violent Outbursts, it needs green mana, and green mana probably the color that it's most short on. It's largely a red-black deck, especially now that the base of Cyclers has changed a little bit. I'm guessing that if you're Thieler here, that's the temptation for where to aim a Spreading Seas.
Yep. First things first, though. Let's start attacking.
Well, I mean, the fact that there wasn't a Lord pre-combat suggests that there's not going to be one this turn.
Yeah, and Fabian had an interesting choice here. He did have a Lord in hand. He could have played it, but he chose to keep up, I believe, Spell Pierce for good reasons.
Ingot's Chewer, one of the draws there for 2 Anderson. An interesting one that does give him a way of dealing with an Ether Vial at low cost. In the meantime, though, plenty of cycling going on for this Living End deck. Cycling main phase versus doing it at the end of turn, maybe giving a little bit of information about where 2 Anderson's hand is at right now. Often you'll see players waiting until the last possible moment to cycle just so that they can represent things, but not in this case.
And one thing that could end up meaning a loss for 2A is that he's holding 2 Living End. So if one extra gets countered, I'm not sure if all of these versions play 4. He might have even sideboarded out a 4th one. So that might end up costing him.
Yeah, it's the worst card to have in your hand, because suspending it is very, very rarely going to be good enough.
it's not only a mulligan most of the time, it's also like it means you get one less copy in your deck, which also matters.
Yeah, it's as if someone's cast Extract on you and forced you to take a mulligan. And actually, there have been arguments for Living End decks running slightly more than 60 cards, so the likelihood of them drawing Living End goes down, but the likelihood of them drawing most other things doesn't change too much because they've got so much cycling to pad things out. Whether or not that's a good idea or not, I wouldn't want to comment on, but it's an idea that has been discussed.
Well, if you run more than 3 colors, I think you could do it, because then you can run Ardent Plea, the enchantment that actually lets you cascade. But I think if you just run these Junt colors, you will go down too much on the cycler, the cascade spells.
Well, there is a copy of Simian Spirit Guide here, which potentially might mean a surprise cascade here. Though with Curse Catcher in play, that might not be the safest of moves.
I believe he's got Nahiri's, or is it Ricochet Trap? It might actually be the Ricochet Trap.
It is the Ricochet Trap. A weird element of playing with so many Cascaders is you don't really want to be in a spot where you have cheap spells, because then it means that you might hit them off your Cascaders. So cascades into Living End here, but ends up simply saying, no, I'm not going to worry about Curse Catcher. What does this signal? Goes for the Ricochet Trap.
Doesn't he have to pay mana for that?
Yeah, I believe it still costs 1 red mana.
And his opponent didn't even play a red, blue spell, so... And it's not a spell. So it doesn't work in multiple ways. Like, he needed 1 red mana if his opponent had played a blue spell, which he didn't, and then it wouldn't do anything because it's a trigger ability, not a spell.
So, one way or another, that turn not quite working out for 2 Anderson as he might have hoped. In addition to all of that, dealer now knows that there is a copy of Ricochet Trap in hand. Still more cycling for 2 Anderson here. Archfiend of Ifnir going to the graveyard. Now, one card that I think we saw cascaded through that's potentially interesting for the Living End deck is Karizev's Expertise, that lets you cast a card with a converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand without paying its cost. So if he ends up getting to that one and casting it, he may still have a way of using those Living Ends in his hand without having to suspend them. Yeah,
and actually a nice addition for the Living End as well. Like, as we said before, usually drawing a Living End is a dead card, and meaning you get less Living Ends to cascade in, but with this one, it's actually quite good to have it.
Of course, in the meantime, we're going to see a lot more cycling in order to try and actually get that planner going.
Well, it's on the bottom now, so he's got some work to do.
Yeah, we don't know quite how many copies he may have. It may be that 2 Anderson actually wants to find a fetch land at some point just so he can get a shuffle in there. Typically 3 is the number of copies of Living End that most of these lists run.
Two has got to hurry here.
Yeah, the beat's coming thick and fast now. Master of the Pearl Trident pumping up Tila's team here, and Vendilion Click, meaning 2 Anderson has to show off his hand. Please take one of those Living Ends, he says. I'm quite happy for it to be on the bottom of my deck. I don't think that he's going to have too much luck there, though. A couple of Cascaders and a Street Wraith, along with the Ricochet Trap. Tila does not want to see that one in his hand.
It didn't matter that he showed it. Fabian was going to see it anyways.
good guy Fabian Thiele saying, I'm going to make you not pay for that mistake.
He's going down in style. Well, he cannot actually cycle the street trade anymore. He can't go down in style.
Yeah, you're not even allowed to pay when you don't have enough life there. You can't go to -1 with Street Wraith. And there's the handshake. Fabian Thiele picking up a 2-0 victory there with Merfolk over Living End. That the end of our live games here, but GP Copenhagen, so much magic going on. We're doing our best to get you a little bit of time-walked magic as well, and that'll be the next thing you're going to get a chance to see. I know Rich Hagen was in our feature match area, rubbing his hands gleefully at the potential of seeing just a little bit more modern going on here. We'll get a chance to show you that right after these messages. Hello and welcome back to the coverage of Grand Prix Copenhagen. We've already had a couple of great matches here in round 2 in Denmark. Our main matches have finished in terms of live, but we got a couple more matches to bring you, 2 of in fact, from our time walk matches. So let's head back down to the feature match area for even more of round 2 here in Copenhagen. So our first chance to get a chance to see any of Death Shadow, and here it's up against Elie Pichon playing Blue-Red Storm. I know that Pichon does really enjoy playing these kind of combo decks, and when Storm gets its good draw, it's winning on turn 3, which might be a bit of a challenge for Grix's Death Shadow here. I'm really intrigued to see how this matchup plays out. The key for the Storm deck, if it wants to go off by turn 3, is getting either Baral, Master of Compliance, in play, or a Goblin Electromancer, and having it survive into that 3rd turn. While it's possible to do it without one of those two, it's really tough. We will have to see whether or not the discard and removal heavy Death Shadow list that Cobra is on is able to put that together. The early game of this particular matchup is the die roll. Whether or not you're on the play on the draw makes a relatively big difference for Storm. Does have the Goblin Electromancer, and at this point he won't really realize what he's up against because a Flooded Strand really doesn't give away too much information as to what's coming. But a Lightning Bolt is the play there, so we know that Cobra is going to be fetching an appropriate land to be able to cast that. He goes for a Steam Vents, and at this point the range of decks that Cobra is on, while not as broad as just Flooded Strand decks, is still quite wide.
Yep, could also still be Blue-Red Storm with Lightning Bolt. Could be Grixis Dead Shadow, could be Delver, could be Grixis Control. Could be quite a lot of decks. Might even be like something like with white, blue, red control.
But Polluted Delta getting sacrificed, we're beginning to see a little bit of a theme coming out here, and at some point Blue-Red Storm is going to figure out what's going on here, and yeah, this is losing his first Goblin Electromancer problematic. The next step will be, can Pekka Kopra put together some kind of an offense, or is he going to choose to hold up removal that's going to mean keeping Electromancer or Baral in play is really tough.
A lot of information in this format comes from how happy your opponent is to take 2 from his shock lands. Like if he's like, play it, fetch, take 2, he's probably on Dead Shadows.
There is the Death Shadow, currently on 1/1. It's a 13/13 that gets -X, with X being life totals. So right now on 1/1, I would expect that to increase surprisingly quickly, and with Death Shadow decks, both players' life totals go down pretty fast.
Yeah, and you never know how big the Dead Shadow actually is. Like you might think it's only a 1/1 at this point and just point a grape shot for 1 at it. But then if your opponent cycles a Street Trade or plays a Surgical Extraction, you actually wasted a card and a turn.
So Manamorphose here coming from Elie Pichon. It will generate him 2 mana and draw him a card. Also generates 1 Storm. We have a high-tech way of keeping track of Storm in our feature match area for our coverage team. I currently am counting on my fingers. At some point, if we start moving on to having to count on your fingers as well, that probably means that Pichon's in good shape.
It's lethal. No, it's not lethal yet. Yeah. If both our fingers are up, it's going to be lethal.
So Baral in play here. And Elie Pichon plays another land, which means he can still have things coming. Once Baral is in play, everything that Elie Pichon's deck is doing gets supercharged. The rituals become cheaper. Things like Manamorphose becomes a net gain in mana. That exactly the sort of thing that he needs in order to keep his train moving for generating large Storm count. Storm ended at 2 on that turn. That's how many fingers I had for that one.
You can put them now.
For now.
Yeah, he actually forgot to put up his second finger. He hold up the thumb all the time, but he forgot to put up the second finger.
Behind the curtain there with Tim and Moraine here in round 2 at Grand Prix Copenhagen. Extra mana available. There is a Terminate in hand for Pekka Kopra here. Starts off with Fatal Push though. There is the potential for something like Remand here from Elie Pichon, though Cobra does have the mana available to recast it. Simply lets his Baral get killed off.
In a way, Modern is more and more feeling like Legacy. Like in Legacy, there were so many powerful cheap spells, but with cards like Dead Shadow and Fatal Push, Modern is slowly evolving into a very fast format. Not like combo oriented, but just like very efficient cards. Yeah, and the thumb is up again. We got Storm 1 here.
Manamorphose. This is a digging Manamorphose, much like we saw last time. Not ideal because these Manamorphoses are very, very good once you're going off. But at this point, Pichon doesn't really have the opportunity to hang around. He casts a Merchant Scroll. Storm 2, he now gets to search his deck for any instant, any blue instant, and put it into his hand. Originally from Homelands, that the version that Elie Pichon's using was reprinted, I believe in 7th, maybe 8th edition, meaning that it is legal in this modern format, and finds an Echoing Truth, that will be able to deal with Death Shadow no matter how big it gets.
Yeah, and Merchant Scroll, obviously one of the centerpieces of the early High Tide decks in Legacy. Oh, I love that deck. Only islands, and then turn all of your islands into double blue producing lands, and even triple. That deck is just great. It's still around, but it's not that good anymore.
Now here's the real question though, is Merchant Scroll the best card in Homelands? It might be.
I'll leave that to the viewers.
Yeah, if the chat wants to weigh in on that one, happy to hear from you. In the meantime, both of these players' life totals down into single digits, and that kind of a bigger issue for Pichon than it is for Cobra, because with a life total of 7, his Death Shadow is a 6-power creature. It's not too hard to imagine that Death Shadow could be lethal this next turn. Really forces Pichon to pull the trigger on having to use that Echoing Truth soon enough. Few suggestions from the chat as to other great cards from Homelands. Autumn Wellow, Joven's Ferret. I mean, how can you bet against a Ferret? A Memory Lapse, a potent one also. You know, it's just an argument that's never going to be solved, is it? Snapcaster Mage here, bringing back a Lightning Bolt, and that means that this game might well be solved here for Pekka Kopra, able to put Pichon down to 5 life and present an additional threat. Forces the Echoing Truth from Pichon, and a Stubborn Denial enough to close this game out. Pekka Kopra picking up the first game in this Time Warp match in not too much time at all there. The clock was at 42. We've magically moved it forward 4 minutes to get the shuffling removed for you to bring you even more magic, and that means that we're going to get a chance to see all the more magic straight away.
Second land for Elie Pichon. Does he have the turn 2 Electromancer?
I think that he almost has to, and even if he does, he's got to hope that somehow or other Cobra has kept a hand that hasn't got a way of interacting with that. The fact that this Grixis Death Shadow deck can present such a quick clock is a really tough one for the Storm deck, because it means that in addition to having ways of dealing with the quick plan that Blue-Red Storm has of getting down an early cost reducer and using that to win, Pichon can't even just sort of sandbag his cost reducer for a key turn and try and go off all in one turn, because it may well be that Death Shadow also has a threat that's beating down.
Yeah, the only advantage that he most of the time has is that he does not have to storm his way up to 20. Usually like 8, like last time around 8 was enough.
And the big end game for the Storm deck in this instance tends to be casting Gifts Ungiven, fetching Past in Flames and some rituals, generating lots of mana, casting Gifts Ungiven again from the graveyard, getting Grape Shot and making it all happen. So interestingly, even though it needs to in principle get to 20 Storm if it wants to deal 20 damage with Grape Shot, it's not too difficult for it to do so, because Gifts Ungiven and Past in Flames generate so many spells. So Street Wraith getting cycled there. Cobra's life down below 13. That one of the key numbers for this Death Shadow list. Now, some of these Storm decks do, after sideboarding, have Empty the Warrens to generate a lot of creatures in short order and punish Death Shadow decks for going too low on life totals. Now that Tasigur is in play for Copra with mana up, even though there's 2 Stubborn Denials already in the graveyard from Thought Scour, Pichon will have to at least keep in mind the possibility that there could be another Stubborn Denial coming from Copra as a 1-mana negate.
Maybe Ellie still in denial that there's a third one, and he goes for it anyway.
Possibly. Now, a couple of people in chat asking about the White Splash from Elie Pichon. He has got Hallowed Fountain in play. Sometimes you see from Storm decks that they run a couple of enchantment hate cards in the sideboard that use white mana. It's a relatively niche addition, but there are some options there that you do see from some of these blue-red storm lists. It looks like Pichon using that. In this case, I don't know that we're necessarily going to see too much of the white mana coming from Pichon, but Wear Tear is an option that he has available to him. He's getting desperate though. The ritual's happening. Storm Count 1, Storm Count 2, Storm Count 3. Stubborn Denial means that I'm not going to have to find all of the fingers that I need for the Storm deck to win the game though.
And Eli Pichon not really finding the cards he needs to find, I feel.
Yeah, and this is, as it turns out, not a particularly great matchup for Pichon here. He's having to really dig everything out that he can just to get anything going against this Grixis version of Death Shadow here. Stubborn Denial, one of the cards that's really making his life awkward. It's a counter spell that is able to just hard stop whatever's got going on from the Storm deck. Often they have a little bit of mana left over at various stages of their combo, so the likes of Mana Leak can be played around a little bit more easily. The likes of Raman can be played around a little bit more easily, but Stubborn Denial doing exactly what's needed here for Copra to make life very tricky for Pichon.
And Manamorphose, this is not the way it's supposed to be played in this deck. You wanted to make it cheaper first with the Goblin Electromancer, because then it generates a mana. Now it basically just cycles for free, which is still fine, but not the way you want it to go.
Well, I mean, Pichon is racking up spells here.
Well, this one gives Ungiven is going to resolve, but what can he actually find? He's definitely gonna go for maybe wants his creatures.
This is one of the more challenging gifts Ungivens. When you're actually sort of going off the easy way, I suppose, then the typical pile would be Manamorphose, Desperate Ritual, Pyretic Ritual, and Past in Flames. That pile, if you've already got a cost reducer in play, is almost certainly a win, unless there's some fairly significant disruption from the other side of the table. Now, Eli Pichon is not living in that land right now. His opponent has mana up, his opponent has various ways of interacting favorably. So he reveals Past in Flames, Pyretic Ritual, Desperate Ritual, and Baral in place of Manamorphose. Two of those cards get put in the graveyard, so Past in Flames and Pyretic Ritual going to hand for Pichon. The Pyretic Ritual very slightly worse than Desperate Ritual because there's not the potential to splice onto Arcane. So if you have to give someone a ritual in hand, that one certainly makes sense.
And the problem for Eli this game is that he's got to use too much resources already to get that second Gifts Ungiven resolve. Like, he already had to use one Gifts Ungiven plus Desperate Ritual and the second copy of Desperate Ritual just to make sure it resolves. He's also used already 3 Manamorphose, so it's not something he will generate mana with in the later game. So I think it's going to be a tough game for Eli to win.
Yeah, I mean, the way that he could potentially get there is if he ended up with enough mana that he can resolve a Past in Flames and use all of that gas that's in the graveyard. But I think that he may find himself on a short clock to do that. Pekka Kopra here, he has that Tasiga who's chunking in for 4 points a turn. And Kopra with mana up and the ability to meaningfully interact with what Eli Pichon has going on is in great shape here. He actually has Snapcaster Mage to potentially get another Stubborn Denial off at some point, which is really, really tough for the Frenchman here.
Yeah, and problem is that Eli is at 3 lands. Like, if he would not miss the land drop, like,
yeah, if we were at turn 8 and he'd hit land drops, then yes.
Yeah, but he had to use Desperate Ritual last turn. Would have been so much better just to be able to play the 4th land and keep the Desperate Ritual. It would have meant 2 mana of difference in this turn.
Yeah, Copra here not going for the kind of explosive win, but a decisive one nonetheless if he's able to get there here, because he is playing the control deck in this instance. And I guess that's what the Grixis version of Death Shadow gains that the Jund version has a little bit more trouble achieving. Copra figuring out exactly how many cards he wants to exile with the Delve on Gurmag, because he does want to keep one Stubborn Denial in his graveyard, and that has to send messages to Eli Pichon as he looks on the other side of the battlefield there. You see him drumming his fingers on the table, head in his hands.
Yeah, I don't think Blue-Red Storm is the deck you want to be playing when Death Shadow is the most popular deck. Like, discard spells are already quite worrying, but if you add 4 or 3 Stubborn Denials to the mix and Snapcaster Mage, that's really worrying me.
And I have seen Stubborn Denial even splashed in the Jund list. Typically, the Jund list has the potential to splash either blue or white, sometimes for Lingering Souls, sometimes for Stubborn Denial. Both is a bit of a stretch. Neither is certainly defensible also. Pichon in check here. He knows that if he passes and just lets attacks come in, he will lose the game, so he's going to be in the tank a little bit, trying to figure out if there's any way that he can keep this dream alive.
The dream is always alive.
I mean, that's one of the things with Storm we talk about already this weekend. Players having particular decks that are the ones that they really want to hone in on and play just because they love playing them. Storm is one of those decks. I know that John Finkel, for a long while, this was his go-to deck that he wants to play in Modern or in pretty much any format, given the opportunity. So Pichon goes for his Pyretic Ritual here. 3 red mana in the mana pool. Thanks for that, Pekka. 4 mana in total wouldn't be enough to be able to cast a useful Past in Flames, so there's going to have to be some follow-up here. And goes for the Grape Shot, just basically as his way of saying, all right, fine, you know what, you got me. And there's the handshake from Eli Pichon.
If he would have kept all of the mana Morphoses, he might have been able to win.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda. I think that he kind of had to dig for what he needed and ultimately wasn't able to quite get it all there.
Oh, if Pekka would have sacrificed the Polluted Delta to play the Snapcaster Mage and the Stubborn Denial on the Pyretic Ritual, Eli could have dispelled the Stubborn Denial, 2 mana Grape Shot you for lethal. So it was actually still kind of close.
Complicated situation there, but ultimately going to the Grixis deck, and we get a chance to see a little bit more Magic in our Time Walk rounds. The regular rounds just kind of closing out here in round 2 of Grand Prix Copenhagen. Kevin Grove on the left of our screen, who we hear has a spicy one, up against Jonas Jensen on the other side there. Jensen, having lost game 1, is on the play, and he's up against Amulet Titan. Now this is a complicated deck.
Yeah, very complicated, especially once you have 2 copies of Amulet in play. Then it gets even more complicated. And it's also kind of risky. You really need to know what you're doing. I believe Kevin actually top-8'd one of the last Modern GPs with the deck.
There we see a suspended Ancestral Vision from Jonas Jensen, who is on blue-white. Just a Teleria West tapped for turn 1, but look at the number of copies of Amulet of Vigor already in Kevin Grove's hand. You mentioned that this deck can get kind of complicated once there are multiples of them in play. There is every possibility that could happen here, and if it does, it could lead to a very, very quick game. Serum Vision's the play here for Kevin Grove. He finds a Gemstone Mine off the top there. He does need to make sure he gets lands in play, because that's the one piece of the puzzle that he's a little short on. put one land on top and something else on the bottom, which we didn't quite see. Gemstone Mine, starting off with 3 counters. It's one of the lands that you're not too sad about having to pick up if you do play any of the bounce lands from the Titan deck. And it looks like Jensen might have gone to draw his card and missed removing a counter from Ancestral Vision. So that the extra hand that's on the table there, that's a judge just explaining exactly what's going on here. Important to make sure that you resolve your turn in the appropriate order. And of course, a GP is a long event. Picking up a warning for a missed trigger in round 2, there's a lot more rounds to play if you want to win this tournament. So that's something that Jonas Jensen's going to have to be kind of careful about going forward. Ancient Stirring's the play here from Grove, looking to piece together more of what he needs, and sees a Simic Growth Chamber. The Karoo's a very, very important element in this Amulet Titan deck because they're the things that are going to be generating him a lot of mana with Amulet of Vigor. The first Amulet is coming down here, and it looks like Grove even has Spell Pierce, so that if there was a way that the blue deck was planning on stopping that Amulet, Grove was ready.
Yeah, and the problem with Jonas' deck for this particular matchup is that all of his answers are so expensive. Like, you cannot count on Cryptic Command against a deck like Amulet Titan. You might think you're in good shape when you're holding a counter spell, but we already see 2 Spell Pierce in Kevin's hand. Will be very hard for Jonas to resolve his Cryptic Command against these cards.
So Kevin going for another Amulet of Vigor.
And I believe Kevin has the Summoner's Pact, so I think we're in for a very long turn here.
You know what? I'm down. Let's do this. So already Jonas Jensen, he's left with a decision. Is now the time that I spend all of my mana to stop it? He says no. So Amulet of Vigor, when you play a Simic Growth Chamber, we now have lots of triggers. It comes in and there are 2 triggers to untap it. So he gets to generate a lot of mana before having to bounce a land with that Simic Growth Chamber.
He's added 2 mana. He's added 2 mana and a blue mana, and then he's gonna transmute the Tolaria's West.
So he's bounced and transmuted Tolaria West. So I believe that he has, he has no mana floating right now, but he's fetching a Pact of Negation, which is going to make it that much more difficult for anything that this blue-white control deck wants to do to stop him, because he knows that if that Summoner's Pact gets countered, that might be problematic for him, and he doesn't have all that much spare mana knocking around just yet.
Yeah, but so it's going to be next turn where he will have backup, double Spell Pierce, and Pact of Negation, which should be enough.
And next turn, of course, the perfect turn to do things before Ancestral Vision finally unsuspends, thanks to having missed that trigger earlier on for Jonas Jensen. Could be extra painful for him if he finds that he's not able to get where he needs to be simply because of that missed trigger. And you see that now he does have a die on top of his deck to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. Unfortunately, dying might be what happens to him this very turn. There we have another tap land coming into play, generating plenty of manage for Kevin Grove here. He's going to be going off.
Double red, double green.
Already a Primeval Titan in hand. This is typically where these decks...
He still has to return a land, though.
Do everything they need. Yeah, returns Ghost Quarter. Loopy amounts of mana achieved.
I think he has 1 blue floating at this point. He used the Gruul Turf to add 4 mana, the Simic Growth Chamber for 2 more mana, and the Ghost Quarter for the 7 mana. Cryptic Command, yeah. How many of my answers do I need to play here? With the 1 blue floating, you're gonna see Spell Pierce, and I think now he will get the land that gives his creature haste, plus the white red Karoo land.
Now there is a Ghost Quarter in play for Jonas Jensen here, which in principle makes life a little bit more complicated. In practice, I think that Kevin Grove is an experienced enough player that he should be able to find a way of playing around that. So it looks like he is thinking about a few different options here. So Vesuva and Simic Growth Chamber, the choice is, copies his opponent's Ghost Quarter initially. I guess that given that he knows that he's still got the option at using Summoner's Pact to get another Primeval Titan, he doesn't need to go off too early with finding Slayer's Stronghold and Boros Garrison initially. So Kevin Grove, still more Amulet of Vigor triggers.
So now he's got 4 mana. And the Vesuva is still about to untap twice, right?
Yes.
So he's actually got 6 mana once again.
6 mana once again to cast another Primeval Titan.
And the Ghost Quarter will be untapped. Oh, he will have to use the Gemstone Mine though. Yeah, he wanted to Ghost Quarter before playing that. That second Titan. So now Summoner's Pact for a second Titan. There we go. Speed it up. That's some very quick searching there.
Yeah, we are fast approaching round 3 here, so we're going to make little elements of our Time Walk match move a little quicker. One of the bonuses of being a Time Walk match, find Slayer's Stronghold and Boros Garrison. Because there's 2 copies of Amulet of Vigor, he can untap both of his, he can give both of his Primeval Titans haste. He can give both of them +2 power. And the next thing up, once he attacks with those Primeval Titans, is that he can fetch a couple more lands into play, generate still more mana.
With the first one he searches 2 Gemstone Mines, and with the second one he founds a land that gives him double strike.
Yeah, Sunhome Fortress of Legion giving double strike to one of his Primeval Titans.
And the way it worked,
he actually has enough mana he can give double strike to both.
And because he had double Amulet of Vigor, he was able to give both of his Titans haste first.
So that is the end of what was, I mean, it was a quick game anyway from our perspective, but Kevin Grove executing beautifully there in round 2. We will very shortly be able to give you round 3 here at Grand Prix Copenhagen. The players just sitting down. I'm going to be jumping out. Moraine, you're going to be with Simon Gertzen as we move to round 3 here at Grand Prix Copenhagen.